Vinnie Morello vanished without a trace. Carla read, Bellamy died behind bars. If she ever truly died, Damien Wells betrayed them both. Milo Chen knew everything, then disappeared. These names once ruled the underworld, but their stories didn't end. They only went deeper. In a world built on silence, fear, and control, the shadows never stop moving. Gangster Land isn't just a tale of crime. It's a legacy of power that refuses to die. In the summer of 1982, on the gritty streets of Chicago's South Side, few people paid attention to Vinnie Morello. At just 19, he was like many other kids in the neighborhood. Slick hair, loud voice, leather jacket 2 sizes too big. But unlike others, Vinnie had a vision. While his friends were chasing quick cash or joining local gangs for street cred, Vinnie was carefully studying the power structure around him. He knew that respect didn't come from fear alone. It came from control. And control required patience, intelligence, and timing. Vinnie's journey into the underworld started small, almost invisible. He ran errands for older men in the neighborhood, cleaned up poker games, delivered envelopes, and always kept his ears open. It wasn't long before he began organizing his own little crew of teenagers. They weren't violent, at least not in the beginning. Their game was car theft. Vinnie understood that people valued what was shiny and mobile, and nothing was shinier than a brand new Cadillac in the 1980s. They worked fast and quietly. In the middle of the night, cars would disappear from driveways and parking lots, only to be stripped for parts and sold across the city. Vinnie's operation became so efficient that local police thought they were dealing with a professional auto theft ring based out of Detroit. But the mastermind was still a teenager, operating out of a rented garage behind a laundromat. Word spread, and people noticed. One of those people was Salvatore Romano, a man who had ruled Chicago's northwestern districts since the 1960s. Known as Sal Ice for his cold, calculating demeanor, he rarely took interest in street-level operations. But Vinnie impressed him. Unlike the usual hotheads who burned through money and made messes, Vinnie ran his crew like a business. He showed discipline, kept a low profile, and most importantly, he made money. Sal brought Vinnie into the Romano crime family, first as a low-level associate, then as a trusted handler of operations that required subtlety. Vinnie transitioned from stealing cars to fencing stolen goods, organizing bookmaking, and running small casinos out of basement bars. His network grew, and so did his reputation. Within 5 years, he was no longer seen as the kid with the quick hands. He was now Vinnie Morello, the problem solver, the strategist, the man you called when things needed to be done cleanly. But with ambition came risk. And Vinnie had already decided that Sal Ice, as powerful as he was the last obstacle between him and true leadership. In the summer of 1989, Sal disappeared during a fishing trip near Lake Geneva. His body was never found. Officially, it was ruled an accident. He was presumed to have fallen off the boat and drowned. The media mourned the mysterious end of a known but untouchable figure. Within days, Vinnie stepped up to take control of Sal's territory. What the public didn't know was that Vinnie had orchestrated every detail. The fishing trip had been arranged by one of Vinnie's men. The boat had no working radio. The crew never made it back, and the only person who returned to shore was Vinnie himself, calmly smoking a cigarette with a story about a storm and bad luck. By 1990, Vinnie Morello became the youngest organized crime boss in Chicago's history. He restructured the family like a corporation, managers, territories, accountants. He expanded into nightlife, security firms, and trucking. His businesses appeared legitimate, but behind every smiling bartender or polished bouncer was someone with a record and loyalty to Vinnie. He was no longer stealing cars. Now, he was stealing entire neighborhoods, and it was only the beginning. Carla Bellamy, better known on the streets as Red, earned her nickname from the color of her hair and the blood that followed wherever she went. She wasn't born into crime. She was pulled into it. Growing up in a rundown part of St. Louis known as Blood Alley, Carla saw her father stabbed in front of her at age 9 during a dice game gone wrong. Her mother overdosed 2 years later. With no family, no safety net, and no options, she learned early that survival came to those who took control of chaos. By 16, Red was working corners for low-level dealers. She was quiet, observant, and ruthless when she needed to be. She studied the men who ran things, noted their habits, memorized their connections, and slowly began to replace them. Not with brute force, but with strategy. She didn't waste time arguing for power. She just took it. By 22, she controlled the drug flow in 5 blocks of Blood Alley. Within 5 more years, she controlled all of it. But Red wasn't interested in just St. Louis. She had eyes on bigger markets. Chicago, Detroit, Indianapolis. Her heroin operation was built like a machine. She used rehab centers as cover for supply chains, recruited ex-cops as drivers, and paid off enough people to keep her name out of headlines. Where others got sloppy or greedy, Red was calculated. Her product was purer, her deliveries were faster, and her threats were always followed through. When she expanded into Indiana in 1995, she crossed into Vinnie Morello's territory. At first, it was quiet. Her people set up safe houses in Gary and Hammond, blending in, operating cautiously. But it didn't take long for Vinnie to notice that something wasn't right. His crews began coming up short. Customers were disappearing. One of his stash houses was hit and torched. Vinnie responded the only way he knew how, with precision. A team of his men raided one of Red's warehouses, killing 3 and burning the rest. It was a message, but Red didn't scare easily. Instead, she escalated. Over the next 6 months, both sides engaged in what would become known in underworld circles as the Border War. Bodies were found in cornfields, alleys, even public parks. Semi-trucks vanished on highways. Informants switched sides, then vanished without a trace. It became clear to everyone watching that this was not just about territory. It was about dominance. Red was the first woman to ever seriously challenge Vinnie's empire. And unlike others who had tried, she wasn't losing. If anything, she was gaining ground. Then, in a move that surprised everyone, the violence stopped. There was no public truce, no handshake, just silence. Red's trucks began moving freely across state lines again. Vinnie's crews stopped interfering. Rumors circulated that a meeting had taken place in a lockdown warehouse outside Kankakee. Neutral ground. No one knew what was said. No one knew what was exchanged. But what followed was even more unexpected. Financial records from a later investigation revealed that Vinnie had begun channeling large sums of money into dummy corporations linked to Red's name. These companies, real estate firms, cleaning services, import businesses, were fronts used to launder money on a scale neither had ever done before. The cooperation between Vinnie and Red became something more than just business. In 1998, a quiet property sale in Oak Park showed a house, previously owned by one of Vinnie's shell companies, transferred to Carla Bellamy. Not a rental, a gift. It shocked law enforcement. No one knew if this meant loyalty, partnership, or something else entirely. What could cause 2 people, who had nearly destroyed each other, to suddenly become allies? Theories spread like wildfire. Some believed they were lovers, others thought they had uncovered a common threat that forced their unity. But those inside the world of organized crime knew one thing for sure: when Vinnie and Red stopped fighting, the streets didn't become safer. They became colder. Together, they had become something new. An empire without borders, without rules, and without fear. And no one knew who was really in control. Milo Chen never intended to be part of a criminal empire. He was a quiet, meticulous accountant who preferred spreadsheets to conversations and spent more time organizing his files and socializing. He graduated top of his class at DePaul University and built a reputation as the man who could fix any financial mess. That reputation eventually reached the wrong ears. In 1999, he was hired to clean up the books for a private security firm that turned out to be a shell company for Vinnie Morello. At first, Milo had no idea who he was really working for. The payments were generous, the clients were distant, and he was told to ignore any irregularities he found. But Milo couldn't help himself. He was addicted to numbers and patterns. And within 6 months, he noticed those patterns told a disturbing story. The security firm wasn't just a cover for laundering money. It was the gateway to a much bigger financial network involving nightclubs, trucking companies, rehab centers, even churches. All of them tied together by hidden transfers, fake invoices, and offshore accounts. When Milo brought his concerns to the company's manager, he was told to keep doing the math and stop asking questions. That was the day Milo realized he was in deeper than he could handle. But the money was too good, and the fear of what might happen if he quit too strong. So he kept going. And as the years passed, Milo's role expanded. He began handling not only Vinnie's accounts but Carla Bellamy's as well. Red, as Milo knew her, was even more secretive than Vinnie. Her transactions were always heavily coded, her companies constantly changing names and ownership. Milo was the thread that kept it all together. He managed the transfers between their empires, maintained the secrecy, and ensured that nothing could be traced back to either of them. Then in early 2003, something shifted. Milo received an unexpected visit from an IRS agent investigating an unrelated tax case. The questions were casual at first: routine audits, verification of payroll data, standard procedure. But Milo's instincts told him it wasn't random. Someone had tipped off the government. He panicked. He tried to quit. He sent encrypted emails to both Vinnie and Red's teams, stating that he was leaving and suggested they find someone else. Within 48 hours, Chen vanished. His car was found in long-term parking at O'Hare Airport. His apartment was untouched, his bank accounts frozen, his phone disconnected. There was no evidence of a flight, no security footage of him at the airport, and no goodbye messages to family or friends. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. Months passed without a single clue. Then, a year later, construction workers renovating an abandoned warehouse in South Chicago stumbled upon something buried in the concrete foundation: a rusted metal briefcase. Inside were ledgers filled with coded financial data, handwritten notes, and a small USB drive. Forensic analysis of the files revealed the full scale of what Milo had been hiding. The USB drive contained records of millions of dollars moved between shell companies, payments to political campaigns, and contracts with private security firms in foreign countries. Milo had been tracking every transaction. He had been building a map of Vinnie and Red's entire criminal empire, probably in preparation for his escape or leverage. But before law enforcement could act, the warehouse mysteriously caught fire. Arson investigators determined the blaze was intentional, and all physical evidence, including the briefcase, was destroyed. The files had been backed up by agents, but Milo's final location was still unknown. To this day, no one knows if Milo was killed, ran away, or is hiding under a new identity. What remains is his legacy. The proof that Vinnie Morello and Carla Bellamy had built something far more dangerous than a traditional crime syndicate. They were laundering money not just for themselves, but for powerful people across the country. And Chen, the quiet man who never meant to be involved, had become the one person who knew it all. Damien Wells was known as the enforcer you never saw coming. Tall, silent, and always dressed in black, he was Vinnie Morello's right hand for over a decade. While Vinnie built empires from boardrooms and backrooms, Damien kept the streets in check. He handled the dirty work: intimidations, disappearances, and the quiet messages that reminded everyone who was really in charge. His loyalty to Vinnie was considered absolute, almost legendary. But like everything in Gangster Land, legends are rarely what they seem. Damien came from the West Side, raised by a single mother and hardened by the kind of poverty that left permanent scars. He joined Vinnie's crew in the late 1990s, starting as muscle for a nightclub. He was smart, though, and more disciplined than most. He didn't drink on the job, didn't talk loosely, and never left a trace. Vinnie noticed that. Within a year, Damien was promoted to overseeing collections. 2 years later, he was leading enforcement across the Chicago network. By 2005, Damien had become Vinnie's shadow. He arranged meetings, secured deals, and enforced silence. He knew where the bodies were buried. Literally. And he made sure no one crossed Vinnie without consequence. But what no one realized was that Damien carried a personal wound that never healed. His younger brother, Jordan, had tried to escape the streets. He had dreams of becoming a paramedic, a rare light in a dark world. Then, in 2008, Jordan died from an overdose. The heroin had been cut with fentanyl and sold through one of Carla Bellamy's crews. Damien never forgave Red for that. But more than that, something in him broke. For the first time, he began to question the loyalty he had given to Vinnie. Because it was Vinnie who had allowed Red's network to operate freely, Damien didn't act immediately. He waited. For 3 years, he watched from the inside, collecting secrets, memorizing patterns, and pretending that nothing had changed. In 2011, the federal government launched Operation Glass Veil, a task force aimed at finally cracking the code behind Chicago's organized crime network. They had little to go on. No hard evidence, no cooperative witnesses. That changed when a file landed anonymously on an agent's desk. It contained transaction logs, names, addresses, and a phone number. When they dialed it, Damien Wells answered. No one expected Vinnie's most trusted man to be a traitor. But Damien wasn't doing it for justice. He was doing it for revenge. For nearly a year, he wore a wire. He recorded meetings, tracked deliveries, and provided maps of properties tied to both Vinnie and Red. His cooperation led to a chain reaction. Raids were launched, safe houses uncovered, warehouses shut down. More than 40 individuals were indicted, including key lieutenants and front company CEOs. Red was arrested in Detroit outside a casino she secretly owned. She didn't resist, didn't speak, and gave no reaction. Vinnie was harder to catch. After a multi-agency operation cornered him at his mansion in Oak Park, agents moved in. But by the time they reached the second floor, he was gone. They found a hidden room behind a bookcase, filled with shredded documents, scorched cash, and one chilling note scrawled in black ink. I was never here. No prints, no signs of struggle. Just a security system that had been disabled from inside. Damien was moved into witness protection immediately after. He vanished, given a new identity, and never seen again. His betrayal had struck a blow so deep, the entire underworld shifted. Trust evaporated. Crews splintered. Allies turned into enemies. But despite the evidence, the arrests, and the chaos, one fact haunted everyone involved in Operation Glass Veil. Vinnie Morello had slipped away. And no one knew if Damien's revenge had truly changed anything, or only scattered the pieces of a larger game still being played from the shadows. In the years following the fallout of Operation Glass Veil, Chicago's underworld changed. But it didn't disappear. With Vinnie Morello vanished and Carla, Red, Bellamy behind bars, many believed the empire had collapsed. News outlets called it a win for law enforcement. The city breathed a little easier. But inside dimly lit backrooms and encrypted phone calls, something else was happening. A quiet storm was building, one that no one could trace because its face no longer had a name. By 2014, whispers started again. Old roots reactivated. New shell companies appeared in states untouched by the original network. Nevada, Florida, even Alaska. The money moved differently now, faster, smarter. Cash was no longer the primary fuel. Digital currencies, offshore holdings, and real estate ventures began to rewire the game. The feds noticed the patterns but couldn't find the source. Every time they closed in on a lead, it slipped through, like chasing smoke in a storm. That smoke always led back to the same code name, the Ghost. No one knew who it was. Some thought it was a remnant of Vinnie's network, possibly an old lieutenant picking up the pieces. Others believed Red was still pulling strings from prison, orchestrating the new empire through intermediaries. But investigators who dug deeper began to suspect something more terrifying. That this wasn't a ghost from the past, but Vinnie himself. Unconfirmed sightings poured in from around the world. A man matching Vinnie's description was reported in Buenos Aires, then again in Prague, in Macau. But every lead ended in dead ends. Sometimes literally. Journalists who tried to follow the story disappeared. Financial analysts who flagged suspicious transactions lost their jobs or worse. It was as if the empire, once large and visible, had folded itself into something invisible, untraceable. Then came the Munich incident in 2017. A cyber investigations firm discovered a hidden digital wallet linked to over $180 million in cryptocurrency. The address was flagged during a routine sweep of dark web transactions tied to narcotics. 3 days later, the firm's office was broken into. Servers destroyed. One of the analysts, Thomas Reed, was found dead in his apartment, ruled a suicide. But his laptop, hidden under floorboards, contained fragments of an internal memo. It was a name, Black Pines Holdings. The memo linked Black Pines to multiple shell corporations, all previously tied to entities connected with Vinnie and Red. One listed address led to a private luxury resort in British Columbia, completely off the grid, owned under an alias, Vincent Merlo. It wasn't enough to prove anything, but it was more than just rumor now. Someone had rebuilt the empire. Not just rebuilt, but perfected it. Cleaner, quieter, harder to detect. The days of guns and street corners were over. This was a network of investors, brokers, and corrupted officials working behind the mask of legitimacy. They weren't extorting nightclubs anymore. They were influencing elections, funding private armies, buying entire districts. Inside the FBI, a classified task force was created, not to arrest, but to understand. Who was the ghost? Was Vinnie still alive, or had he trained someone to continue the legacy? Red had remained silent in prison for years, refusing every interview. Some believed she knew the truth but stayed quiet to protect herself or someone else. Then, in 2021, Carla Bellamy died. A heart attack, according to the official report, but prison surveillance cameras malfunctioned for 4 hours the night she died. Her cellmate was transferred immediately after. Her body was cremated within 24 hours, with no autopsy requested by family. Just like that, the last known leader of the old empire vanished. By death or by design. What remains is uncertainty. The streets are quiet, but the money moves faster than ever. The ghost still lives in the background, shaping the future of a criminal landscape that's no longer ruled by bullets, but by data, deception, and power. Gangster Land never truly ended. It simply evolved.